Yeah, it's gonna stand right for that.
Yeah.
Legs bobbing now, like.
I was telling them, I'm seeing some back on some of the shelves now on the side, like I've got some trucks. I don't know if that was last fall or if that was early this year.
It's probably early this year. I mean, they grow
Yeah,
fairly
go make,
quickly.
get up, make two a
I
can
mean,
for free,
because,
I can. Yeah,
when our, one grad student, when she, we basically did serial, deployments of shell strings and followed some of them throughout them. And I mean, by like the really guys that sent us to, they were definitely, that big by like August. So, I mean, they, like I sometimes, even in just like, if I have a shell string that has to stay out for, 2 weeks, like because of weather or whatever. I mean, they're definitely very visible with the naked eye. I mean, probably, like they grow amazingly fast.
I did a couple of shell strings out last year off my corner workers and stuff, and it was cool to see how fast it could grow
Yeah,
and
yeah.
how different, different levels of
Yep.
where they were and where they were.
Yeah.
It was very neat.
I wish you
Yeah,
had said that.
no, I mean, it's amazing that they can go from that, there are, at times, even after just 1 week, I mean, like, you can see them with your naked eye.
I was so nervous, get nervous, I was like, nothing, I was checking once in a while.
Yeah.
if everybody's ready, it's 4 o'clock, we'll go ahead and get started. For the record, I'll let the record reflect, it's July 28th, 4 o'clock, Fort Monroe, the Shellfish Management Advisory Committee meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Deal there. I'll do a roll call for introductions. Just we've had a few changes on the committee, and I guess if you're present, you can stay here and introduce yourself, I guess, and that way we'll just make sure everybody's here. So I'll just go down the list there. I have Daniel Dice. I believe he's not going to make the meeting today, so he, I think he had a crab delivery he was taking care of. Emery Rice.
Yes, sir.
All right. Beverly Ludford.
Here.
J.C. Hudgens.
Here.
Charles Johnson.
Sir.
Jackie Shannon. I believe she had a conflict as well. Thomas Kellum.
Present.
Rich Harding. I believe he had a conflict as well. Irvin Deal.
Present.
Mike Shackelford.
Here.
And Monica Shinneman.
Present.
And Don Porter.
Here.
Okay, and that's the current SMAC membership there. Let the record show we do have a quorum, I believe.
All right, moving on. If everybody can take a look at the agenda, and I need a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve.
All right, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, moving along, approval of the minutes. If everybody could take a minute, if you haven't already, and go over the minutes from the last meeting. I'll be looking for a motion to approve the minutes.
We hit it in front of the season. You were supposed to look at those first.
I'll make the motion.
All right, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a second. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Approval of the minutes. All right, moving on. Update of the 2026 replenishment program. I'll turn that over to you, Andrew. If you can give us a rundown.
All right, thank you. So I guess at the last SMAC meeting, we had a discussion about the modification to the replenishment plan. And the committee voted to, I think, limit our spending to, I believe it was 1.5 million, a combination of things. And I'll just kind of overview what we've done so far this year. We have a couple projects that are still ongoing, but I'll give you an overview of what we've done this year. And then just a brief overview of sort of the historical replenishment effort that's gone on. I'm going all the way back 30 years, just to kind of give you an overview of the size and scope of it, given the issues we're facing with, the replenishment plan needing to be modified in the absence of the shell dredge. So I'll go into that, sort of set up some background for discussions that we have on the preliminary season there. And just so you all know, I put that season together just for discussion purposes to sort of facilitate some debate from the committee. Obviously, as we get onto that, I'll get some input, and we'd like to come back again that August meeting to sort of finalize things. So just wanted to state that, and I'll jump right into it here. So this is just a quick overview. In total on shell and seed combined, we spent just shy of $900,000, which bought us close to 150,000 bushels of shell and seed. That included, the biggest chunk of that has actually come from a seaside shell deposit where up to 54,000 bushels have been planted so far this year on 2 locations on Punketree Creek and Pocomoke Sound from that seaside deposit. House shells, we were able to get just under 50,000 bushels of shell, and those went into the Rappahannock, York, and off Blackberry Hangs area. We're additionally stockpiling another 30,000 bushels of shell on the seaside areas for planting next fall, so we don't have a set in stone planting location for that, but those shells will be ready as a supplement to any other shells that we can get next year. And then James River seed, we did close to 18,000 bushels of that. And there's just a quick overview of those total amounts. Again, the sort of per unit cost per bushel was just under $6 this year. With the highest dollar stuff obviously being the hand tong seed that went to the Cone River. Again, just a fancier way of showing you the same things, but that's sort of the breakdown of the program this year. In addition to that, we did some alternative substrate. This is primarily non-general funds, so I know there have been some discussions about limiting general fund spending. The majority of this funding was federal grant funding, that 10,000 tons for the Mob Jack, and then some non-general funds from Friends of the Rappahannock for that additional planting in the Rappahannock was the majority of that funding source. And then replenishment funding was used for that Site 2 in the Rappahannock to put smaller size stone on Area 2 there, some of the stone plants that we planted before. So that was what we planted this year. I'd be glad to answer any questions or any specifics on that, but all things total, if you convert the stone we planted to bushels, we're right around 350,000 bushels or bushel equivalent of planting this year is the amount of substrate we put over. So much smaller than we've done historically, but still one of the larger programs. And again, we did that at considerably less cost than we would normally do running a larger program, so that funding is still available in the budget for future utilization.
All right, do we have any discussion, questions?
Andrew, you said that it was 350,000, that's much, what do we normally come to?
I can show you that. That's my next part of the slide.
Okay.
If you want to roll with that. Are there any other questions specifically on?
No question.
Okay, yeah. Thinking ahead of me.
Do we have any other questions pertaining to this? All right, we can move on.
So I didn't pay him to say that, I promise, but so this is a long-term replenishment overview. So I went back through close to 32 years of replenishment data that we've compiled to sort of give you kind of a snapshot here. And I guess to answer your question specifically there, over that time period there, we've averaged about 700 to 800,000 bushels per year. Obviously, there were some years where it was a lot more, in the millions, and some years where it was closer to this in that time period, depending on funding and size of projects and federal input. And this isn't just on harvest areas, just on sanctuary areas. This is just sort of everything combined. I might be off a bushel or two. I put this together pretty quick, but that gives you a ballpark of about what we've spent or what we've put overboard. Another takeaway is total harvest off public and private in that time period is close to 9.7 million bushels harvested over that same period. And that's an average public harvest of 117,000 bushels. So that goes all the way back in the 90s when harvests were much lower compared to the replenishment that we're putting overboard now. Of that total amount of harvest, approximately 4 million bushels came off public ground and 5.6 million bushels came off of private ground. And over that long time span, 32 years, that's a little bit more than 6 times the amount of shell planted for the bushels of harvest. So that's, again, taking into account the 90s and early 2000s when we were really building these areas up. More recently, if you go back over about 10 years or so, it's about 2.5 to 3 to 1, the planting of bushels of shell to bushels of harvest. But again, on that average of about 700,000 bushels per year is what that 30-year time period. Again, just another way of sort of looking at that, but the average year for private ground, 177,000 bushels, 117 for public ground, and that total harvest again there, close to 10 million bushels total. And this includes sanctuary plantings and all of that, but there's sort of some takeaways for you. And I asked Mitch to double check my math before I might change those numbers a little bit, but I went through this pretty quick the last couple of days just to put this together to kind of give an overview of those amounts. And that was really all I had in that historic, but sort of your takeaways are about 700 to 800,000 bushels a year. Right now we're in that 200 to 300,000 bushel range, so that's where you get that 2 to 3 bushels of shell planted for every bushel of harvest. And again, this includes non-harvest areas, and not every single area that's harvested is obviously replanted, and some areas that are replanted might have more than that 3 to 1 bushel planted back on them. So we obviously don't replenish everything where harvest came off of each year. We replenish the areas that are most in need. So it's not a perfect comparison, but that sort of gives you a general overview of the last 30 years or 10 years, however you want to split that up, to see where we got to get these harvest numbers and the resource to be in the state that it is today.
I got a question, Lee.
All right.
Andrew, do you anticipate having any money left over this year?
Yes, so we have not fully utilized the general funds
Okay.
for shale planting this year, and we
Mhm.
had some carryover from last year as well. So I don't have that exact dollar amount, but
Okay.
there's a considerable surplus still.
And we will be able to carry it over if we don't use it, right?
That's the way the budget language is still written, that this rolls
Okay.
over back into the replenishment funds for years in the future. And it
Mhm.
hasn't been the case where any of that money's gone back to the general fund since I've been here. It's always rolled over. If we have $10, it rolls over. If we've had $100,000, it's rolled over.
Do we get interest?
I think there actually is, there might be. I mean, I think if it sits in an account, I think you actually do get interest, but that would be a question for admin and finance.
Okay.
All right, Corey?
That 700 to 800, is that, if you were to go, just use recent history, say over the past 10 years, that number still hold about the same? Okay,
Yeah.
thank
Yeah.
you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
And also, just, I believe this number is just Bayside, so that doesn't include Seaside Eastern Shore. Yeah.
All right, moving on.
Okay. All right, that brings us to number 5 there. So, I guess folks may recall that, I guess, what was it, a year or so ago, we proposed some changes about oyster tagging. And then there was a little bit of some misunderstanding at the commission meeting, and we ended up sort of tabling that. But this isn't anything really major or changing in terms of industry or anything like that. What we're really doing is sort of primarily updating language, the shellfish harvester tag, so the tag you have to put with your oysters if you're a harvester. One of the changes that I think should be helpful for both harvesters, enforcement, dealers is switching from, right now we have 2 tags. We have a bulk shellfish tag and a harvester tag. Technically, if you're using a bulk tag, that's supposed to go with a lot of shellfish. So if you have a bunch of shellfish all in a boat in different containers, that bulk tag is supposed to go with all of that lot. If you have individual containers, the way the regulation currently reads, if you have bushel baskets that aren't going in a tote but are going separately, technically you're supposed to have an individual tag with each single one of those bushel baskets. There's a little bit of confusion in how that works, and if you're in a boat and you dump them in a tote, then just the bulk tag goes with it, or just a harvester tag, and that's considered your container. But this kind of takes away any of that ambiguity, and you have a tag that clearly indicates the number of oysters, where they came from, harvest area, single harvest area, and sort of takes away, is this a bulk tag, is this a harvester tag? You can use it for either thing, so it's interchangeable. So right now, typically people use one tag for private ground and one tag for public ground. When you get them from the office, we're just gonna switch to one tag. You can still use dealer tags if you're a dealer, shellfish dealer, you give it to your harvester, they can just tag it with that dealer tag. Green restricted use shell stock tags, which not that many folks use, but occasionally go out, aren't going away. The biggest change is really just updating in our tagging regulation, we have water bodies, so James River Middle, James River Lower, just sort of these huge water bodies, and technically, that's all you need to put on a tag. And in the event there was a recall or an illness or something like that, if, you know, FDA or our health department gets a shellfish tag and all it says on there is James River and they have 10 of those tags, you're potentially looking at James River getting shut down. Whereas if you have an individual growing area, or if it's private ground, better yet, a lease number, you really want to be as specific as you can to limit the impact if there is a trace back and Virginia oysters are implicated. So this is really a change to sort of update language to better reflect what's in the National Shellfish Sanitation Program Model Ordinance, and sort of make the growing areas, you know, a little bit smaller on what's required to be in the tag. Folks are following the VMRC web map. These growing areas are already shown on there, so it should be relatively straightforward. And then the only other updates are really just a few tweaks to language and definitions. No changes to any sort of packaging requirements, anything that you're going to be doing post-processing. This is really just focused on the tags. So you won't have to do any kind of major changes if you already have a bunch of stock and inventory and your oyster lids or whatever it is. And we'd be looking to delay the implementation probably till July 1st, 2027 to sort of start, not in the middle of the season or anything like that, but kind of when that fall season officially starts next year. So this likely, I think we're looking at probably a September commission meeting on this regulatory change. We just wanted to bring it to the advisory committee to sort of get any input or answer any questions before it came up at the commission meeting, likely in September.
All right, Andrew, I've got a question to start it off with. With public harvest, so we'll just say Rappahannock Area 6, will that still be sufficient, or should they go with whatever growing area that is?
It should be both, I think is how it's gonna work. So you should have the growing area and then Rappahannock Area 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just
And it's
wanted to
basically just
clarify.
it's like a 3-digit number, is all it'll be. So there should be room on the tag. And so if you're public harvest, you want growing area, harvest area, private harvest, growing area, preferably lease number.
All right, I just wanted to clarify that. Any other questions on that?
I got one question. It's not on the agenda, but I'm working private ground at the present time, and I'm concerned about time, and I know VMRC doesn't control that. I know it's the health department, but right now we're starting like 6:10, and depending on how far you are from the dock, you know, you have to quit about 20 minutes, 30 minutes early. You know, you're getting a little over 3 hours of work time. And of course, we have legislation in Washington to try to make permanent daylight saving time. I like to see, and we ain't got to do it tonight, but in the future, if we could bring that up for discussion, you know, like now, we really need it over an hour. We need 11 o'clock finish instead of 10 o'clock, but don't know what would be required to do that, but I'm sure all the guys working private ground, and of course, some of them carry ice. I don't do ice, you know, and you know, maybe that's the reason why they do that, but a lot of guys work longer than what I do, but my old butt, 4 hours or 3 hours is enough for me. So I would just like to see that maybe added in future SMAC so we could talk about it.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that's a federal.
Federal health.
That's FDA.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's
okay.
it's more of a health department question, so I won't get details, but it's basically based on sort of a calculation they do on risk and all the time temperature, and there's a lot that goes into
Oh,
that
okay, it's a
distinction.
formula they use, I got you, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it makes it tough to make a day's work, I tell you. I mean, if you're working private ground, you know, splitting the bushels and all, it don't give you much time to make a day's work, I tell you. Okay.
All right, any other questions on the upcoming tagging regulation changes?
Just, will it require a reprinting of the tags, or is the tags that you have now, can you write in?
I would have to kind of look at how this regulation finalizes, so we're still working on some of the language there, so that's part of the reason for that delayed implementation. It's allowed you to sort of use up the tags, but we'll likely order, at least on our end, new tags, so if you have a whole pack of old tags, some of those might not be valid, especially if they're one of the other tags. So I think technically you probably can cross things out as long as the information is on there correctly. Like, you don't have to buy a tag from VMRC, you can print your own. So as long as the information is on there and correct per regulation, you should be okay.
I think it would be a good thing to allow people who have tags that on the first, if it all works out the way you propose, the July 2027 implementation, that the people who had tags, if they can't use them and write on them, then they can trade them for the new tags without cost. In other words, they've already paid for them.
Mhm. That's something we could definitely consider, particularly if they're VMRC tags, but that consideration. And see if, talk to the health department folks and see if a Sharpie marker and crossing something out or writing on there is good enough, they might be able to still use them.
When the health department changed some of the language on the individual tags, in the past, they allowed you to use a magic marker or I've actually had to rubber stamp new language on the back of one of the tags for a while until I used them up, but they're so expensive, I couldn't afford just to pitch them.
Well, never like to see anything go into landfill if you can reuse it, so, yeah.
All right, any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, that covers the overview of proposed changes to shellfish tagging regulations. Let's move into preliminary discussion of 2026-2027 oyster harvest seasons.
All right.
Andrew?
So I said it to a couple folks, I think, and just touched on it beforehand, as I kind of put that season together just to kind of stimulate discussion. So as I said before, try to get committee's input on that. And I could even pull up the Excel spreadsheet and sort of shuffle things around a little bit if the committee wants to kind of do that exercise again here this go around. But I'll give a quick overview like I usually do and show you a couple things. And if the committee would like, I can kind of walk you through my thought process on that season and get input. Would that work for y'all? All right.
Sure, I think so.
I can't not put this graph up there. I feel like I wouldn't be putting a presentation together if you didn't see it. But this is the public-private oyster harvest combined going all the way back. Goes back further, but I cut it off to make the new numbers fit in there. But last year's harvest, again, these are preliminary numbers, but pretty close. It's obviously down a little bit from our historic highs when we were up over 300,000 bushels in the public ground. I think we were right around 218,000 or so bushels reported off public, which was down a little bit from the previous years. Private ground harvest was down a touch, but still over 300,000 bushels. Here's a little bit of a closer up view of those numbers for the 2025-2026 season. It was a little bit busy, but this is again showing the overall everything combined that we survey, shell volume, spat, market, and this brown shell volume here. And you can probably zoom in a little bit closer on some other graphs, but shell volume is holding above our sort of 5 liter threshold, right around 8, but it has come down a little bit across the entire bay over the last couple years, but it's not where it was in the prior to 2005 time period before spat sets really started taking off. So in general, particularly, and this is 25 data, we haven't had the fall survey yet. The resource is still in pretty decent shape in most areas and most locations. There are obviously some spots here and there that are less good, and we haven't yet surveyed from done a full fall survey of all the areas to sort of see where we'll be replenishing next year. So that'll be happening in the fall. So we're not basing this on data post-harvest for this area. This is prior to the harvest season last year. If there's any specific area questions, I'd be glad to walk you through our new ArcGIS tool, and we can dive in if you guys want to get into the weeds. So I just have that link up there. If you have a question about the resource in a specific area, we can all look at it together. I'm going to come back to that later. But just to give you something to sort of start talking about, this is the season that a version of this committee approved back in 2021. Just to kind of give you an idea of what the seasons looked like prior to increased resource and sort of the longer seasons that we started about 3-4 years ago now, where we were kind of stretching the scrape season out to 4 or 5.5 months. This was the season from last year with the season extensions. So again, we had that season opening in October in the Rappahannock and October in the James, going all the way through March in the James River and all the way through the middle of March in most other areas there. So that was, I think, one of the longer seasons we've had in a while, but again, it was a elongated season, but total harvest was down even with that somewhat elongated season compared to, some of the seasons we had in early 2020s. This is just, again, sort of what I put together, which was kind of based off of those two comparison seasons. And one of the things that this committee has discussed, and I think there's pretty broad consensus on, is one of the things that we've done well over the last several years is really splitting areas up so that there's multiple areas open at multiple times to kind of split up the fleet, as well as having multiple areas opened up to multiple gear types to split up the fleet that way. So you, rather than, folks may remember some of the periods in the 2016 time, 2014, where we had a single standalone area open in the Rappahannock and we'd have 120 boats showing up there. So we all sort of came to the consensus that that's probably not a great thing to do, that if you have at least 2 areas opened up, that splits it up. And sort of in 2017, we started adding sort of additional gear types into the mix and having sort of pat tong areas opened up and taking another 20 or so boats out of that hand scrape fishery and allowing them to work in that pat tong fishery concurrently to sort of further split up that effort. And we increased bushel limits in hand tong areas, and some of the areas like the Upper York River, White Shoal, parts of the Upper Pocomoke. We put a lot of seed in the cone, Nominee. Those areas have held some boats here recently, and with some of the increased recruitment up in Area 9, the Rappahannock, it takes another 15 or 20 boats that would normally be in the scrape fishery if that was all open, and split that up by gear and kind of spread the availability of oysters out over time. One of the things you probably noticed looking at that is it is condensed somewhat, so it's closer to a 4.5 month rather than a 5.5 month season in total. Don't have anything stretching into March, keeping that area open in the James in October, and sort of having a lot more overlap, or overlap that's similar to what we've had in past seasons. And the reason for sort of at least discussing that is really our ability to replenish is likely going to be reduced. I'm not sure how much reduced, for at least it was this year, and it's likely going to be reduced for at least another year, maybe 2 years. So the resource is in good condition now, but normally we're replenishing at that increased rate. So 2 or 3 bushels of shell going back for every bushel of harvest. And right now we're right around that 1-to-1 return. So I'm not really so much concerned about the resource this year, next year, the year after. It's really if we're not replenishing at that level 2 or 3 years from now, if we continue fishing or increase the effort or get something wrong, then those areas aren't necessarily going to be able to support the effort that they have been if we're not putting or able to replenish at those levels. So there's a lot more uncertainty, I guess, out there, and for that reason sort of wanted to discuss the potential of a maybe modestly more conservative season than we've had in some of these areas, but still allowing some of these other gear types to participate in the fishery and keep that effort split up, having these short seasons like we've done in Area 7 and 8 that seem to have worked out, and potentially looking at having some of these breaks in between areas being opened, or sort of breaks the fleet up a little bit. The folks who drop the buoy and stay there for a month, maybe they pick their buoy up and are working in a different area, and these areas aren't getting worked down quite as intensively. Which hopefully happens, the market's stronger this year and there's more of an increased demand. Again, there's a lot of ifs, so we'll see, but that's sort of the reason for giving you something to shoot at here. The other change on there is I've had some discussion with some of the folks over in Tangier and Pocomoke Sound. And I guess a lot of the folks here aren't really Tangier Pocomoke folks, but the Pocomoke Sound, most of the reefs or oyster rocks over there are in that 10 to 15 foot of water, whereas Tangier Sound, they're in the 20, probably all the way down to 55 feet of water where they're working in those areas. It's probably, unless you're using a patent tong, which Dan probably doesn't even want me to say that really the only way to get to those oysters is with that larger dredge. The smaller hand scrapes really just can't get down that deep. But the Pocomoke Sound is an area where there's usually more effort. There's smaller boats. A lot of those boats already have hand scrapes. And we were seeing a decline from the high points in some of these areas when these areas were open to 3 months of dredging with the 3-foot dredge rather than the hand scrape. So that was a proposal to discuss, is just for the Pocomoke Sound, looking at potentially transitioning that area, or at least temporarily, see how it works to a hand scrape fishery rather than the dredge fishery there. And again, change from last year was sort of extending the hand tong season pretty much across the board in all these areas. We had some calls from hand tongers that were still working. I guess the other thing that this committee is primarily commercial, but all these areas, if they're open to hand tong, that's a public resource that in theory anyone can go out and recreationally harvest on. So whether or not it's an opportunity for commercial guys to go out there and catch 14 bushels, maybe not in all these areas, but it's an opportunity for the recreational folks to go out and potentially get a bushel if they want to try it and can find a pair of hand tongs and want to go ahead and feel the burn, as it were. But and that's sort of the reasoning behind what you're seeing there. And I'll stop talking there and have a sip of water and be glad to answer any questions or just sort of open it up to discussion and get your all thoughts on things.
All right, Andrew, I've got a question to start things off. What's going on with the shell dredge? Is there any update on that?
Yes, so at the Blue Ribbon Oyster Panel met on Friday, and Adam, jump in here if I get anything wrong. I believe the commissioner had spoke to the H&L Contracting, who's current owner of the dredge, and Ben can jump in here too if he's heard different. He was, and Tommy, I guess, Ron and Beverly there on the panel as well. My understanding is that the shell dredge is at least not going to be operable for this year or next year, the current one, and then I think the sort of economics of it, if you will, were in they'd like a pretty big contract to make it justifiable for them to come back. So I think in the 10 or 12 million range in order to come back, which if we didn't spend our $4 million for 3 years, that in theory would be available. I don't know the procurement mechanism, but I don't think we can kind of promise a contract out that far in advance, but I don't want to get the weeds in that. But that's sort of what we're looking at, is there's no necessarily a guarantee that they'll be back in here if we agree to this, but it looks like that particular dredge is likely not going to be in operation at least next year and possibly the year after that as well. I think we are exploring other options, so there's a potential for other ways to extract that shell. You can do it mechanically. It's just a matter of washing and sorting, and then the logistics of getting 700,000 bushels planted in a month and a half is the other challenge you have with any of this. So even if they did come back for a contract that was in theory 3 times the size, I'm not sure it would make sense logistically to plant every single area in the entire bay that needed shells in 1 year, rather than sort of planting as needed that we've been going along. So those are the things to kind of take into consideration when we're talking about the shell dredge. But that's the update and the information that I have on that situation.
All right, thank you for that. All right, I'd like to open it up for discussion, questions. Have any discussion, questions on the proposed harvest season for 2026, 2027?
Hey, Don, are you on there?
Yeah, I'm here, Andrew. I do have a question about this 2-foot dredge. Are you talking about 10 and 11? Or are you talking about the whole Pocomoke Sound?
Primarily the whole Pocomoke Sound. I mean, Shell Rock would be open this year, so that was something to consider, is switching those shallow areas there to hand scrape rather than the full-size 3-foot dredge.
Well, Dan and I talked last night about it, and we're not on board with it for one reason, well, several reasons, but just like the Tangier guys, if they want to dredge in Tangier Seine when it's pretty, they can do it with a big dredge. But in order to come into Pocomoke Seine, they've got to switch dredges. And when you switch dredges, you gotta switch tables. Because when you stretch across a table that's set for a 3.5 or a 4-foot dredge, and you put a 2-foot on it, you'll be using Bengay left and right. It'll kill you. I'm just not on board with the 2-foot for the Pocomoke. To be honest with you, I don't see what the benefit of it. Me personally, I've been on a private ground with 3.5-foot dredge. I've been on a private ground with a 2-foot dredge. I just don't see what the problem with the big dredge is. I mean, maybe you could explain that to me.
Sure. So I think, one of the thoughts behind that was with that larger dredge, if, let's say there's 40 boats on Shell Rock, for example, and they're there for 3 months, I think the tendency to sort of stay in a single area with that larger dredge, maybe rather than moving every 3 or 4 days if it's really good, they're staying there with that big dredge for 2 or 3 weeks in that one spot. So I guess it's more efficient to use that big dredge. So there's less incentive for the harvesters working on public ground, not on their private ground, to keep catching oysters as long as they can. And I guess the thought was, if you can catch oysters there with the small dredge, that maybe it would keep at least a portion of the fleet there moving a little bit more off the better parts of the rock and sort of looking around as an area starting to get down and they're not catching their limit in 45 minutes, it's taking them 2 hours with a hand scrape there, then they're going to move back to a spot and kind of work it more evenly rather than staying right on top of the rock was the thought process. I think when it's 1 or 2 boats on private ground, it's a different animal, but when it's 40 boats on public with the dredges, we can really see the impact in our survey after that's happened. So, after Shell Rock and Trevis's, not every boat did it, but you probably were out there and saw, 30 boats that didn't really leave from the top of the rock for most of the season. Some folks left and kind of went looking around, but when you have 30 boats with the big dredge staying there, getting their limit, that shows up in the survey, and those are areas that definitely are going to need replenishment. So that's sort of the reasoning behind that, Don, was hoping to get folks moving off the best area a little bit quicker before that area got worked down. I mean, there's other options, obviously, too, of looking at maybe shortening the season, or if it is getting worked down, closing it. But this was sort of a way of maybe not taking that step, but reducing some of the impacts by keeping the season at that 3-month time period.
Yeah, well, stands the reason you're going to catch your limit quicker with a 3.5-foot dredge than a 2-foot. So you're going to spend less time on the rock. I've been doing this all my life, and we've been using big dredges in the Pocomoke County forever. Some guys use smaller dredges because they got smaller boats. I just don't see the effect of it, to be honest with you. And right now, if this year's like last year, you don't have anything to worry about. I think the most boats I've seen in the Pocomoke Sound last year was about 7 or 8 boats at one day. Mm-hmm. The market's going to roll that, and I'm hoping it's going to be better, but I don't know. I'm not for a 2-foot dredge in the Pocomoke, and that's the way I feel. And I'm not for it. Whatever you do, I'll live with. Just don't understand where stands to reason if you're on the rock with a 3.5-foot dredge for an hour and a half, and going in with your limit, you got to sit there for 3 hours or 2 hours and a half with a 2-foot dredge. The damage is still going to be done, in my opinion. But that's me. I don't know it all. So we'll go see what happens.
Now, I appreciate that. Is there any other thoughts on scrape versus dredge from the committee there on that one?
I mean, I see Don's point, but I mean, because it kind of works the same way on private ground, so I'm going to understand where he's coming from. So and I never have worked over there, so I'm not a good example to discuss that, but I'll go along with what he says.
And again, it's hard to sort of blame a gear type on this. I mean, I think it's, what we see on the survey on Shell Rock is, you can see where the effort is, and we haven't done it to see if it would look any different if they were using a hand scrape and catching the same number of bushels. So, it's just something to consider and get input on. But we do see that this is one of the areas that, after it's been open to this gear for 3 months, it definitely needs replenishment, and we've been putting a lot of shell over into Pocomoke over the last 6 years really, and it's really come back, but we're, again, 2 or 3 years from now, if this area isn't replenished after this year, I'm not sure. We've already started to see this area go the other direction compared to some of these other areas. So that's sort of doing something over there. But there are other ways to get at that, that we could discuss as well.
All right, any other?
With the seaside shell deposit though, and the replenishment, isn't the Pocomoke one of the easiest places in our current situation to replenish?
That is true. Yeah, but this is one of those areas where it is very large. So, we've been planting, 100,000 bushels of shell, but that's close to probably what we could get out of the seaside over there this year.
I got a couple questions.
Jason.
Andrew. James River, area 1, 2, and 3. I noticed you have March. You're not having any hand scrape in March. Do we do any replenishment in these areas in the James River?
We have recently been putting close to 250,000 bushels a year in many of the areas in James River. A lot of that went on to Nansman Ridge and here recently onto that Jail Island plant, but we have planted areas in the hand scrape areas as they needed it. So we planted Ballard's Marsh, Thomas, Upper Thomas's, Lower Thomas's, Upper Brown, Lower Brown. All those areas have seen replenishment in the last 10 years at a pretty high level. There are a few areas in the James River that at least shell-wise, there's still lots of market oysters there. But we are starting to see some of those areas in the James River decline brown shell volume-wise with the effort that's been on them over the last several years.
So in your opinion, if we was to open hand scrape in James River in March, you think that would be detrimental to the stock? I know the guys are gonna ask for it, and that's why I'm asking.
Well, I mean, I guess the short answer is anytime you're taking more oysters, that's reducing the stock. So, I mean,
Yeah.
if you're taking more oysters,
I mean,
then yes. But whether
last year was awful good down there, though. I mean, the guys done really well. James River really pulled us out, I think, as far as, I don't know what the actual numbers were, but I'm sure they were about in the right pattern.
Yeah, no, I mean, what March looks like would really kind of depend on how that first 4.5 months went, and just I believe, Adam, please step in if I'm wrong, but our regulatory nimbleness is sort of returned to where it was, so we can take regulatory action a little bit quicker than we could under the past administration. So we can adjust things a little quicker than we have been able to in the past. So again, it's sort of hard to say now, but I understand that we have had that season. But if you look back to what we used to do in James, we used to have a 3-month season, and the population was going up. We've had close to a 5-month season there, 5.5 months, and the population is going down, and we didn't put any shell overboard in the James River this year.
Can you leave that slide?
This was with last year.
Yeah, thank you.
Mike, what do you think? I mean, you're my James River guy. You think March would hurt it, what you've seen down there?
Well, why don't you wait and later on in the year when you come back and you could go and see how things, you don't have to do it right then, you could come back in January, February, see how things is, and that's the way I mean,
just gotta come to the commission like we have to do. I know we were trying to get away from that, and try to make these decisions ahead of time, so, but I guess we can. I mean, but I know the guys are gonna ask for it, I mean, because it's a lot of boats down there.
yeah.
And And we will, by the end of December, we should have our full area Pat Tong survey done. So we'll have
Okay.
a much better update on what these areas look like before the start of the season.
Okay.
And
I got one more question on the Rappahannock, Andrew. I noticed you reverted back to Pantone for Area 1 for 2.5 months. Is that because of replenishment efforts you don't think, if they hand scrape it, you don't think we're gonna be able to replenish it like it should be done?
Well, that area, I guess, when it did switch over to Pat Tong, we were not having to replenish there.
Right.
And I know we went back and forth on that a lot, but we were
Yeah.
getting over 3 years, about 20,000 bushels a year was coming out of there.
Mhm.
And in 2-month rotation, about 60,000 bushels was coming out of there, but we'd have to replenish. It did get replenishment this, I guess, last go around. We did put some of those areas back after we did have that shorter scrape season there.
Mhm.
And the real main reason for that is, I guess some of the rotations have been kind of shuffled and rearranged, but that was, again, to kind of give a good Pat Tong area that was protected, out in Deep Rock. That Bay Area didn't really quite pan out, where maybe, I'm not sure how many boats would go Pat Tong and if they could, but I think at its peak, 20 or so boats out there.
As much as 30 probably, at the peak.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that helps split things up, and I guess the other reason for that is if that area is good for patent tonging, it kind of holds a consistent, I won't get into the quality of the product, but it's kind of consistent boats, consistent people, and it's sort of a steady supply of oysters for the market rather than a new scrape area opening up and 90 boats go in there and all of a sudden that one area's got all the oysters. So it kind of spreads out that harvest longer and then kind of splits up where those oysters are coming in.
Yeah.
So that it's kind of an even distribution rather than focusing in just one area.
I think my biggest concern was, and the reason why we changed back to hand scrape for this was, we only got Area 6 and 7 and 8. This was a year that we needed this Area 1 to be able to fill in for the small, for small Area 6 and of course 7 and 8, a month in each one of those. So I think that's my biggest concern is because a lot of the boats can't go patent tonging. I'm all for the patent tonging. I didn't want to see it changed. I think I'm very much on record that I want to keep it patent tong, but don't know how that's going to affect us this year. With those small areas being open now. I don't know if anybody else has got any thoughts on that.
I got a lot of thoughts.
Chair,
Go ahead.
given staff's concerns with how we're gonna get replenished back and so forth, and given the quality in that area, I would give consideration just to leaving Area 1 closed this year.
That's a lot.
And just for discussion purposes, we did do a resurvey on Area 6 and 7 after the harvest. I think we probably went over some of those numbers, but those areas held up pretty good with that those short 1-month seasons up there. So those areas have, not saying they'll stay in good shape forever, but as of last fall and as of this spring, Area 6, 7, and 8 were all in pretty good shape up that way. Area 6, although it's small, the area that sort of we planted there, that area, there's a lot of oysters up there right now still. In Manaskin and Moratico, those areas have got 2 really strong spat sets and a good spat set for those areas last year. So it's not the 6, 7, and 8 that we had 10 years ago. It's a whole, I guess anyone who works private ground up there has seen Area 7 and 8 in the last 3 years versus what it was 10 years ago when there was 1 or 2 oysters per square meter. We're up at 10, 12, 15 markets per square meter, which is hand tong levels of oysters up in these areas or more. So they're in much better shape than they were in 2016, 2017, 2018. But to your point, Tommy, their Area 1 is still, it hasn't come back to a level where it was when we switched it over to patent tong originally, but it's still in pretty good shape now. We did get some replenishment over there.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
And also to that point of Area 6, if that's gonna be the only thing open in the month of November, I would recommend taking, if you're not gonna do anything different in October there. Just don't open it until you open it for the hand scrape season in November.
Can you say that again, Tommy? I just,
Area 6,
uh-huh.
it's open, slated for 2 weeks in October. Just leave it closed until November 1st.
Oh, yeah, and just eliminate the patent on. Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Has it ever been Pat and Tong in Area 6?
Yeah, we
yeah,
done
we
5 one time.
No, it was. It
Yeah, we
was
did.
1 year. It's probably been,
6.
what do you think, Tommy, 6 years or
Yeah,
so
we
ago?
did it before the season. We did what we proposed.
We did there, we
did.
did,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay,
Same thing in Area 7.
Yeah, we did it in Area 7, 6.
Okay.
We did it in,
I think we
almost
did
all
it,
the
we did it in
areas.
8, 4, we did it in everything, pretty much. I don't know about 5.
mhm.
Any other discussion? All right, Corey?
So, looking at this and comparing to last year, you know, the Great Wacomico and Blackberry, typically, I know Blackberry a couple years ago had a few shells, and then you did some expansion and some replenishment up there this year. But usually we get a month on each area in recent history without any replenishment in the Great Wacomico. If you leave it as you have for 26, 27, my worry is come December 1, the ones that are gonna go oyster and are going up the RAP. Nobody's gonna, because there is nothing in the Great Wacomico yet. They're not gonna leave Area 7 for what that is to come back to the Great Wacomico in the middle of the month when they have 7 and 8 already up there. I would like to see the Great Wacomico mirror that. Yes, I'd like to see the second part, the first half of March, if we have to come back later and look at that, but I would like to see it the same as last year, so you keep those boats home instead of sending another 20 boats or so to the Rappahannock that you don't necessarily have to send there. Because for our, I'm gonna call it from the Rappahannock of the northern area, 7's gonna be our only option for the first half of December. And usually by then, nobody's crabbing, you got a handful of gill netting, but most everybody, oysters is the only game in town.
I think I can certainly explain reasoning for kind of condensing that if you want thought process on that for discussion purposes. And I definitely think that makes sense, trying to keep the fleet spread up. One of the things I always consider, and I didn't mention it, is sort of the seasonal nature of crabbing. And I guess I think a lot of times right in the middle of December is when the last crabbers are really stopping. I guess it was last year, different depending on how cold it gets, but that's sort of when crabbing season officially kind of wraps up, is right there. Some people don't go oyster until right before Christmas. So that was, but I understand what you're saying. If people are ready to go oyster December 1st and they're done crabbing, they've got their gear up, and they're done doing that, and they're looking for that, and that keeps them there. So definitely hear what you're saying there. Another reason for that condensing is that March 2-week period. I think I have kind of everything cut off there, that 2 weeks in March.
No, I mean, if that's the way we're doing it, then I'm fine with that. I'd just like to see it go back where you don't, because I can see with the writing on the wall there, you're gonna lose just about all your boats on the Great Wacomico. You might have 4 or 5, and they're all gonna go to the Rappahannock, and they're not coming back.
Right, now that makes sense. Yeah.
So Carl, you want to take have the full month of December?
I'd like to
2
see
weeks?
either 1 or 2 in, because I can't remember which is which, in December, the opposite in January, and then Blackberry in February.
Okay.
Is what I would like to see for that area.
Just for my understanding, is there reasoning to not have that Blackberry overlap? Sort of give that as an option there, rather than having Blackberry by itself for just February, have it overlap with that January to give folks an option?
So you're gonna put it for January and February? I'm not
About
against that, because
Okay.
there are days where it is only 4 or 5 of us that will go up to Blackberry and work, and the rest of them are staying home, so it does give them somewhere to work. Yeah, I'm 100% for that.
Okay.
Any other discussion on these seasons?
Unless you're gonna give us 2 weeks in March later.
Mr. Gallo?
Looking at the this rollover replenishment money and our thoughts that we're gonna be able to hold that when our overall market value plummets. What's our argument with legislators and so forth that we need to continue on the trajectory we're on if we don't have a path to spend the money or to bolster the fishery?
It's a very good question.
We're gonna be at the, I mean, not arguing, just bringing it up. I mean, when you compare what we're being compared to in Maryland and looking at their program, we're not gonna be a heavy producer, going forward, and it's gonna show up in the numbers.
And that honestly was gonna be part of my end statement. We have states around us on the eastern seaboard, Gulf Coast, that are continuously growing in marketing oysters and competing with us. And we're shortening our seasons, and that's, and not replenishing, not having a plan to replenish moving forward. I don't like the looks of that, but that's just just for the record. Ben, did you have something to?
Well, first, I will definitely second what you and Mr. Kellum just said, but my comment was, if we're focusing on not having a standalone area in the hand scrape fishery, you have absolutely set James River up for that the first half of October. And yes, it's a big area and tons of arguments for it, but there's no argument against not having, you got 12 days in October to work. There's no argument to not put something somewhere else so that everybody doesn't fall and stay in James River.
I agree with that. I mean, it's gonna do the same thing Corey said. You're gonna get those boats down there. They're gonna be comfortable, and that's where they're gonna
They're
stay.
gonna have market, they're gonna have everything, and they're gonna stay.
I guess that was part of the reasoning for that, is to intentionally get those boats to stay down there in the James River. That takes sort of pressure off some of these other areas. So to keep the fleet a little bit more broken up in our
So we're
largest
looking,
harvest area.
we're looking to isolate the fleet then. So whatever, and maybe not isolate, but concentrate.
No, keep it split up more, I guess, sort of more even distribution. So we saw, I guess the Rappahannock River saw about a 40,000 bushel shift in effort over when we started kind of having them areas open concurrently. So about 100,000 bushels in the public season was coming out of the James River until sort of market conditions kind of pushed some of those boats into the Rappahannock, and we saw a shift of that 40,000 bushels of effort in the public season into the Rappahannock. So this is to sort of redistribute that to make, hopefully, our two largest areas that produce the most oysters have been, for various reasons, where a lot of the replenishment effort has been focused, and the fleet's effort to sort of more evenly distribute the boats between the whole northern area and the James River was sort of the intent for that. I think the distribution has gotten, when you look at harvest numbers, a little more skewed than it was, 3 or 4 years ago when
Well, on
roughly
that
the same
note,
number was
on
coming
that
from each
note,
area.
say just hypothetically that you find a pool oyster in James River, you have no other alternative. You either have a product that can't be moved or that's sold at a cheap price versus an alternative to shift somewhere and move a product that's good, and as well, a little bit to what Mr. Kellum had to say, to get a foothold in the market to compete with Maryland, who will be online, and whoever else is putting product out there, instead of sitting back and wait and see what happens.
I think that's one of the reasons to have sort of that Patong area opened up concurrently there, was to allow potentially 20 or 30 boats to start working in the Rappahannock to kind of get that market conditions, as well as having Area
I'm just
7,
saying,
8, 9,
I'm just saying, say the oysters in James River are still poor. Where's that piece that they're either going to not work, sell an inferior product for an inferior price, or not have anywhere to shift to, is my point.
Any other discussion?
So are your, just to clarify, Ben, are you saying just keep that, wait till November for the whole scrape season is what you're leaning towards?
No, I'm saying the season should open October 15th, so we're not any further behind than we already will be. But that there should be some other hand scrape area open for those first 12 days of the season is what I'm proposing. Now, don't know where that area would be and would obviously have to rely on somebody with a little more knowledge of the Rappahannock than I have to say, or any other area, but I feel like there should be some other option other than James River for the hand scrape for those 12 days.
I would agree with that.
Any other comments, questions, concerns? Moving forward. And we're not looking for any sort of
Oh, yeah.
vote tonight or anything.
No,
That's gonna be
no. I
for
think
next month's meeting. It's kind of brief overview, so moving forward.
What would be helpful, though, that there's a few different decision points for this committee that we're here and flopping around. What we'd like to do here from staff is take the drafters in front of you, put together an SMAC draft, and then resend it back out to you, so you have a couple weeks to mull it over, you can talk, and that way when we come back in August. So some of the decisions points we've talked to about, is there a second area that this committee would like to mull over the next couple weeks in that October timeframe? Do we want to close Area 1 altogether? What can go into this quote-unquote SMAC draft, or something we can send back out to you that this committee's discussed tonight for some of these decision points? I know Donnie said earlier that maybe Pocomoke Sound needs to go back to dredge instead of hand scrape. Those kind of things we can incorporate into what the committee's talked about tonight, send it back to you, and that way when we're in August, we have a new starting point that this committee's kind of looked at and this committee feels good about. So if we could go back to some of those decision points, we kind of opened up, Ben just opened up with James River in October. Tommy kind of talked about what we should do with Area 1, and then, maybe Great Wicomico as well. Do we want overlapping seasons and all those when it comes back? So I think that would be helpful to at least be in a good starting point for August when we come back.
Okay, thank you.
I got one question. I mean, we're worried about the quality of the oysters in Area 1. Is there any kind of way that we can take a look at this and see before we start talking about closing a very valuable area for harvest? I don't imagine one's gonna be any worse than two was last year. I mean, right side by side, so I'm concerned about that. I mean, we're talking a lot of oysters and a huge area for boats to work. So I'm not sure. Now, if we take a look at it and, they're not shucking to their standards or something, then, but, I mean, that's the whole Rappahannock River. I mean, we're seeing this river wide. It's not just Area 1. It's Deep Rock. It's everywhere. So that's unfortunately, that's the oyster quality the way it is now is some other reasons it's causing it. But we certainly I don't think it certainly doesn't warrant closing this area down.
Just for discussion, so you all know it, again, we'll have at a staff level likely some preliminary survey data by that December 1st opening there in the Rappahannock as it is now. Depending on when we get out there, we can kind of try to prioritize that. But again, that doesn't really get us to having that information prior to setting the season. What's that? Or, yeah, I mean, we could always close an area too based on that, so.
Yeah.
Mr. Kellum?
I would, for consideration, like to look at Area 6, where we've got that full month of February to leave the last 2 weeks of that for after the survey, and put that 2 weeks initially in October, Area 6 for hand scrape. So we would come out of the gate with 2 weeks in February And if staff's survey says that it can stand that 2 weeks, so be it. But otherwise, put that on the front end so that, I mean, essentially, what we're doing here is you're cutting the entire fleet from the Middle Peninsula to the Potomac River out of the fishery for the month of October.
All right, so what you're saying is you'd like to put the hand scrape from the last 2 weeks of February where the patent tongue is now, correct?
Correct.
Area 6.
And then give consideration once that staff has an opportunity to survey and see what their numbers look like, to either come back with a recommendation that yes, leave it like, come back to what it is now, or no, we need to just let it go 2 weeks and close it. And I have grave concerns, as Mr. Johnson, that you're just gonna pile everyone in the James River. And, you know, people are gonna go with the intention of coming back, but we all know how that works. The weather gets bad that weekend that you're coming, and you stay one more week, and one more week turns into 2 weeks, and that's my reasoning behind that recommendation.
And we are creatures of habit, so. All right, you have that noted?
Yeah, no, I think I've got most of the discussion already in Excel here. I can put that up here in a second. I guess one thing that I'd like some feedback on from a staff level, and it didn't come up, and you know, maybe I snuck it in there with other hand tongue areas, is White Shoal there. So that's one of those areas where it's been part of the hand scrape fishery. It's been sort of pulled out at points for a part of the season and hand tongue on it. Just for folks who don't know the James River, most of you do pretty well, but that's that sort of shallow area in the middle of the channel, sort of coming down from the hand tongue area. So it's kind of separate from all the other areas. It's very shallow. Like low tide, you might have 2.5, 3 foot of water on the top, and then it kind of comes down. So it's a proper shoal. It used to be dry. And this area has been good for hand tongers periodically, where they've been getting a very high quality product there. You know, holding, I don't know, Mike, what do you think, 20 boats there sometimes when it's good? So that was something that was different, was sort of pulling that area out. It is an area that's, I've personally planted a shell barge there, and it's a pain because the tide rips through there. It's very shallow. It's hard to replenish. It's almost, you can barely do it if you get a good tide, but it does hold a lot of hand tongue boats there. And it does get that James River product going, and it's been pretty consistent there.
What, that was what, 1 month? Hand scrape last year?
Yeah.
No, it had been, I guess it had been open to hand scrape the entire time as everything else.
No, we backed it up.
But we backed it up, I guess we backed it up almost, by that first 2 weeks it wasn't, and then it was a less than a month. So it was a shorter hand scrape season on top of that.
Okay.
But it is, again, we'll see on the survey, but it is kind of getting maybe not hand tongable now. So that was one of those reasons for leaving it hand tong rather than having a scrape season on it. And again, there's a lot of other places to go, but if boats decided to go there, it might get to the point where it's not as easy to hand tong, or the oysters just aren't there. So that was one of the reasons for that change. Is probably now if we went ahead and left it closed, it could stay hand tong and support those 20 boats, but it's a possibility if the activity continued on it that we might need a replenishment to get it back up to that level.
Any questions, comments on leaving White Shoal as hand tongue only?
Okay,
Yeah, that's fine.
I know where it is. I've never worked it. You know, I go across it to Mallard Marsh to plant. So.
Low tide, you can harvest them out of the boat.
Oh yeah, I do know that.
It's no good to go there after drudging. I mean, 'cause that's no good to hand tone.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's, you're defeating your purpose that end.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, comments? All right.
Just one question, I guess the York, nothing's open in New York, right? Mob Jack, all that's closed this year, Andrew?
Well, the rotation and the planting and everything that's kind of gone on in the Mob Jack and the York. So none of those areas have had a full 2 years on any of the shell planting that's gone on there, and they've kind of been open out of the rotation. So area 1 just got planted last year, which is Timber Neck area there, so that really should have 2 years before it's harvested. Area 1 was replanted the year before that, but then it was opened, but it really should have had 2 years and been coming on next year. Mobjack, we've decided not to plant because we weren't getting the return on investment on planting in that location, so we haven't planted there. That doesn't mean that there's not oysters there. And then I guess Piangatank was one of those areas that had been a seed area and had been closed for a while, and then the thinking was to see how these short seasons went and then replenish as needed, but again, we're sort of limited a little bit in replenishment. You know, both the Piangatank areas and the Mobjack are on the deeper side for hand tonging. We did have that change in gear that allows, you know, the polars. Piangatank's kind of got its own protection, or did for dredgers. I think some folks tried there, but it has had some really bad sponge. But if you get an area cleared off with either patent tongs, which by code we can't use there because it's above the line, or hand tongs, you might be able to make it work there. So it's just another area that might hold a few boats and is available, and kind of limits our potential replenishment footprint while still providing market oysters and oyster harvest for public in general. But again, New York, we'd had those shorter seasons in the past. Yeah.
Mr. Kellum?
Dr. Mann, what are your feelings on us essentially abandoning our rotational harvest?
If you want to talk, can you come up, Roger, just so people can hear you?
Hear me from here.
Just so we can get the other.
We're down to, don't hold me to it, just quick here, 3 areas in the Rappahannock basically, and that's it. So, you know, the York Rivers and what we set up years ago, what's your take on what we're doing here?
You know, I can remember back, was it 13, 14 years ago when we started in on this, it was an experiment and we all agreed to jump in the deep end together. I think rotational harvest has been the one great thing that's come out of what we've done here in the last decade and a half. You always, in the midst of these things, get down years. When we started talking about rotational harvests, at least my inspiration for it came from watching the offshore scallop fishery. And they do the same sort of thing. They open and close areas based upon what they see in recruitment. And, you know, they've had good years when they've had more scallops and more money than they know what to do with. And in the past few years, they've had a few bad years as well, because they've had not too good recruitments all the way from New York south, although this year it looks a little bit better. So, you know, Mother Nature is out there messing around with this. And in these years of rotations, you're going to get something where your plan 2 or 3 years ahead doesn't work because you just didn't get the recruitment in the year that you had. I think the question that you have when you think about pushing it aside is, if you do that and you upset it, how long is it going to take you to get it back to that? And I sit quietly in the midst here because, you know, one of the things that's truly impressed me about this group, and I've been coming to, you know, SMAC meetings since the days when they were up at VIMS and they almost resulted in fistfights. Thank heavens for the Marine Police being there to quell the riots. One of the things that I've seen is a lot of people sit in this room, make decisions that have been hard for them, often somewhat sacrificial in them. And even the suggestion that you made this evening about, you know, let's just close Area 1 because it isn't in that good a shape. Collectively, this fishery has enjoyed a remarkably good run for about the last 8 to 10 years. I think if you think about it, for those of us who are in this room, and there's many of them, if you think back before that, there were years when there were just remarkable ups and downs, and this was a depressing place to be for a while. I would really ask that you try not to go away from rotations. We've seen them work. They don't always work perfectly. Mother Nature doesn't always agree with you. I would consider that to be a real last resort, because if you do go away from it, it's gonna take you a long time to get back to where we are. And also, if you just, you know, we spend a lot of time looking at this data, and over the last year, we put a lot of it into this GIS spread, and I don't know how many of you go to the Vasara site and look at that. But if you just look at that and you put the time slider on it, and you watch what goes on these things, it'll take you 5 or 6 years before you see these trajectories turn off. It's very easy to get depressed while you're waiting for these things to happen. But if you look at them, they gradually ramp up to where we are. And I don't know, you could dig it up, you've got the connection there. I think going out of rotation really jeopardizes that. So I would really discourage you from pursuing that unless it's a really desperate state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess sort of the reasoning for some of those things in York River is because we did go out of rotation over the last 3 years. So this is, a lot of these areas, if we had been harvesting and planting on those rotations, they would be closed based on that. So this is a little bit of a reset to give us that opportunity to, I guess the other thing that Roger did mention is those rotations are dependent on replenishment afterwards. So that's the piece of the puzzle that's a little bit uncertain right now. So these areas were replenished after they were open to harvest, and based on our survey, needed replenishment. And the York River, for example, is in a 3-year rotation, but it hasn't been for the last 3 years. It's been kind of opened, but it's been planted when it's needed. So not having those areas open sort of gives you that opportunity to reset and look at those rotations again going forward. The same could be said, I guess, for Area 1. Most of the areas in the Rappahannock had been extended or opened out of rotation at points too. So almost all of these areas over the last 3 or 4 years were sort of shuffled around. So sort of looking at this based on what Roger said there, our replenishment is sort of one of the reasons to give us a somewhat more conservative season, is to kind of give that reset based on when these areas were last opened or when these areas were last planted. So a year from now, 2 years from now, you kind of have that, okay, we're back sort of in that rotation that we got out of the habit of over the last 3 or 4 years now.
Is it accurate that Area 1 has been open 2 weeks for hand scraping since 2018?
I don't want to say offhand, but I think the last time it was supposed to come into that rotation for hand scrape, it didn't. But we opened up the Pat Tong 2 months early, so I think that's probably pretty close was for that. And again, that area didn't show any need for replenishment until after that 2-week season for hand scrape.
Dr. Mann?
Roger, please. I like the discussion. I think it's been really good. I do like Mr. Johnson's suggestion that we, in combination with Mr. Kellum's suggestion, that we provide an opportunity not to get all of the boats all stacked in one place early in the season. I think that's a really good move at this point in time. I would like to reinforce something that several of you have said, and we talked about this at the Blue Ribbon panel. As we go through this every year, this is a dance where every year we refine the steps a little bit. And I think that's a compliment to what you've done over the last decade. The thing that, to me, is the sword that's hanging over everyone is what are we going to do about this replenishment situation with this dredge? The commission has shared some numbers with us, and Andrew's done again, and these are truly substantial numbers. And I think Mr. Kellum's point about the fact that what are we going to do in terms of talking to the General Assembly if we get to the point where production is going down because we lose this cycle of replenishment. Yes, $10 million to get this thing up again in 2 years of downtime. We have built a fishery here based upon this replenishment open-close system. Replenishment is one part of this 3 parts. And if you take it away, I think that's a grave problem. I must admit, I've spent a lot of time thinking about that in the last few weeks, and I don't have an open answer to it. We're not going to solve it by the next commission meeting. But there's a lot of of bright people in this room, and I think at some point we need to think about how we're going to live for maybe 3 to 5 years with a much reduced replenishment system. Inevitably, if at 3 to 5 years there is no great dredge coming back, we are into a very different world altogether. A very different world. I would not like to see that world, and I think there's enough expertise here, and I think there's enough political willpower, and I will personally add to that wherever I can, to get the commission, the industry, and whatever I can do as either a private citizen or a member of VIMS to get that dredge or some sort of similar thing back into action, so we can look forward to another couple of decades minimally of doing that. Whether we do it with the same dredge, whether we do it with a modification of something else that's out there, we have lots of expertise on dredging. We've got the Army Corps over here that does this stuff for a living. And I think what we need to do as a group is to look to the question of how we're going to provide ourselves with a facility where we will get a dredge that allows us to put it back into this system. And so if I could implore the members of this committee to support the commissioner and support anything that the Blue Ribbon panel does to the General Assembly to give us that facility again, I personally consider that to be one of the real linchpins of keeping this going. So I apologize for sort of standing on my soapbox. We're doing a good job here. We can massage this for this year. I don't want to be here 2 or 3 years from now wondering what we're going to do when we still have nothing but a pile of rusty bolts sitting somewhere up on Long Island and we don't have a dredge. We need to actually think about how we're going to get that back, because we've built a lot of this based on that principle.
Thank you. Any other questions, concerns, comments?
Just dovetailing, I think, you know, we can't wait probably till next April to start talking about replenishment. I think that's something that's got to start early, and we really need to have a concerted effort and everyone be on the same page legislatively, and because the next thing's going to be, you don't need the money. Then they're going to say, you don't need this big of replenishment staff, you don't need this, you don't need that, and it's critical that we be lockstep.
I agree. That's the big homework project here. I see it's replenishment, truly.
And I think, Andrew, it's okay to say that this is an emergency. It's okay to say that, you know, because there is no alternative right now. And 2 years and $10 million is not something that you can wait on. You know, that's my concern. I feel like that this is something that needs to be brought to the attention of not only the commission, but, you know, this generous assembly that's getting ready to. I think I heard the other day the agency budget has to be in by the 14th of August. Is that what I heard? You know, this is 2 weeks away. It's very serious in my mind.
I agree.
So we need to send a message, you know, to the people that are counting on us for giving the warning, you know, blowing the horn, whatever it is we're doing. We don't want to look back on it and say, well, we knew about it, but we didn't act fast enough, or we didn't take it seriously enough. And if it means that we have to close some areas, that's what we'll have to do. And I've heard, you all have to help me because my memory is not what it once was. I've heard a lot of times the decisions being made because we're concerned that the watermen need the work. And I know that, you know, I know that as well as anybody here. And it's heartbreaking, but there are times when the future has a price, if you follow my drift.
Yes, ma'am.
But on the same note, we were talking about staying competitive with other states of having product to sell in the times that we need to have them when Maryland's ready to go and the other states are going.
It's truly a double-edged sword.
I mean, we've got to get serious and figure it out, but I mean, Maryland's doing it without fossil shell, and we've just got to get out of the box until staff gets an opportunity to figure out this dredge situation and what we're gonna do and get us back. But, I mean, for instance, for anyone in the business, when you get the call the last week of August, the first week of September, from customers that are planning to start October, what do you say?
Right.
And
Gotta
I
wait.
agree with you, but I also wanna just be on record, you know, watching what the watermen have to work with and how delicate this and how much it costs them to be in business.
It's important.
Yeah, and you don't cut it on and off.
No.
I mean, most of them are self-employed and have to pay for everything from a cell phone to the car, to the fuel, to the health insurance, everything, and you just don't, you don't cut it on and off, and that's very worrisome.
Well, I guess.
And let's be honest, there's not a lot of other fisheries to go to at this point in time during this oyster season, you know.
Rockfish is,
If you've got rockfish tags, okay, sure, you know, but anything else, there's nothing to go to.
And just for discussion purposes, and I won't name any particular names, but anyone who knows Maryland's program for a long time, I had a recent retiree, and I did have an opportunity to discuss what life was like after their shell dredging program stopped in Maryland. And I'll paraphrase that conversation, but essentially what he said was, is you're no longer in the driver's seat in terms of the population of oysters. You're much more dependent on that natural cycle. So Maryland has seen that same high spat set, and their fishery is a lot more open than ours. So it can go up really quickly, and then it can come down really quickly. And also, they don't have the private ground fishery that we do in the state of Maryland. So, you know, they might harvest 700,000 bushels a year off of public ground, but their private fishery is a fraction of the size of ours. Most of what is leased in Virginia would be public fishery in Maryland, so they have a lot more area open. And their fishery is a lot more similar to our upper areas, so like the upper Rappahannock, where oysters are living longer, and they're getting those periodically high and low spat sets there. So they're sort of seeing a bay-wide boom, similar to what we're seeing in Area 7 and 8 in the Rappahannock right now, up the bay and sort of across their areas, where normally those are much lower recruitment areas, but they've seen those same booms come up sort of naturally without that replenishment that we started seeing in Area 7 and 8, and then we started replenishing on top of that. And they still have a pretty decent replenishment program. I don't want to quote their numbers, but it's not in the millions of bushels anymore, but they did, up until 2006 or 7, have a program, and their shells, that base was built pretty extensively up there at those points too. But that's sort of the difference, is they get those heavy recruitments, and their fishery will be up here and then come down again. And that's sort of the cycle that they've been seeing post their shell dredging program up that way.
Any other discussion on that? I think we see that there's an urgency to find some sort of alternative or fix for this shell dredging project. If anybody has any ideas, please let us know. And if anybody has any concern, please speak to your deputy commissioners, the commissioner, Adam, Andrew, any of us, I guess. Need to move forward. We need to put our thinking caps on.
I have a question, and forgive me for being the new person here, but I watch all the meetings, and I'm sure this is something that everybody's aware of but me. But are there any options to get shells from any other state or within our state other than these fossil shells?
Definitely, there's, I guess, options worth exploring. So it's really, within our state, we likely can expand our house shell program and get more than we did this year with sort of earlier notice, getting that out there. There's been some discussions about looking to other states potentially that might have shell sources, but a lot of folks, and it's in part of the reason why there are so many oysters around, is other people's replenishment programs. There's sort of demand for that shell. There are other sources of upland shell, and there are other options for extracting shell from these shell deposits that have been utilized sort of almost inadvertently in Virginia. But the Craney Island shell, for example, was mechanically dredged, like the big buckets, and sorted and stockpiled on land on Craney Island. And then some of that shell, because it was no longer technically owned by the state of Virginia, was used in a restoration project in Lynn Haven just last year. So there are ways to get this shell out of the current deposits other than just the hydraulic cutter head dredge. It's just a matter of industry either taking that on, us putting it out for bid, seeing what the cost is, and that's something that I think we're in discussions about sort of doing and looking at, but it doesn't solve the problem today. It's something that I think we're working towards in the relatively near term, next year to year after that, to sort of fill in those gaps. But again, there's still some uncertainty as if we put that out for bid, is it gonna cost $30 a bushel, or is it gonna be close to what we've been paying now? And that's something that's hard to predict without having sort of seen it and what the scale and scope is. But, it's something that I think we should hopefully be able to start developing answers and sort of having these discussions, and they're happening at all levels as well. So I think the more thoughts, the better. But to your point, yes, but how much is a matter of you put it out for bid and see what's available, and you don't really have a good sense of that until you've actually had those conversations, put those out to bid, and sort of put your money where your mouth is, so to speak, and sort of see what you can get for what you're willing to pay. And it's really the scale. I mean, what we do and what we have done, just other than Maryland, when they had the same shell dredge working there, there's just no readily available source that sort of neatly fits into this that's land-based or shucking house. When we were doing the shucking house program, we were planting hundreds of thousands of bushels, and that was after stockpiling them for several years kind of thing. And I don't think there's that continuous replenishment of the shell piles. If we were planting every single house shell in the state of Virginia, I don't know that there would be any shells for private ground, for example, and that's another big part for fishery. So there's just not a ready fix that we have in our back pocket that says, all right, this is what we're doing now. But there's a combination of things that we're actively trying, and then I think we're gonna be exploring all these other options that sort of folks are sort of discussing now.
Thank you.
Does that cover your question? Andrew, just for the record, I would like to state that there is more house shell available to buy. We just have to be competitive in our price with other states and other entities. That being said, that might be something that we want to look at in the interim. I mean, just tossing it out there to have something more to go on the bottom is raising the shell price to be competitive with Maryland. I mean,
Yeah, because like you said, we're in an emergency situation. You can't wait for maybe the boat to be fixed. We're gonna really be in trouble.
I think there's a point in this that often gets lost, in that we invest a lot of money in shell, but then the real question is what does it turn around to in terms of dollars at the dock? I've seen numbers of 2 to 1 and 3 to 1 and 4 to 1 that go into this. Jim Wesson, when he and Andrew's job started doing this, and I'm sure Andrew had him keep these numbers in his head, it's the wrong number. If you invest $1 in a shell and it gives you $2 at the dock, that's the wrong number. It's when it actually goes out to retail and all of the things that are in between that. We use the wrong multiplier when we use fisheries. The federal government does this. They'll take a number as it comes across the dock, and then they'll multiply it by 2, and they say that's the value of the fishery. And it's wrong. What they're doing is that they're taking a value as it goes out of a processing plant, or when it goes out on a truck to some retail plant. What they lose is all the money and all of the infrastructure that goes along with that. When a ship comes into the dock, there's the man who owns the fuel truck, there's all of the businesses that fuel truck going out to sea, there's the shipbuilding industry, the maintenance and everything else. You all know that because you pay those bills. But the point is that when you look at it, $2 at the dock from $1 that goes in, or whatever that number is, it's the wrong number. And the appropriate multiplier, talking to my economist friends, is probably near a 5. So the real number that when you do this and you ask, so you're gonna spend $1 million on putting Shell on the bottom. What's the real number in terms of the impact on the economy on Virginia, even if you don't care about people? What's the impact? And then if you add into that, what are the people that are doing it? And, you know, I characterize this, please don't take it the wrong way. A lot of this money goes into rural areas, which are not the economic engines of Virginia. This is not the Newport News shipbuilding model. This is the guy who's got a boat, who works in multiple fisheries, and probably has jobs as well on land, who maybe works in agricultural construction or anything else. This is sort of rural economy enhancement, and you get the economic driver number wrong. So when you go and stand in front of your General Assembly member and you say, can you make sure that VMRC's got $1 million because it'll bring $2 million back in, you're actually selling yourself short. One of the things that we need in this is actually a real number. I don't believe we have one, although I know somebody can calculate it for you. And I think you need that number to start with, so that when you go to the General Assembly, you can ask for this. You tell them what the real impact of that is. And I think that's a really important thing to do. And if we're going to have a conversation this session with the General Assembly, then we need to have that number in our back pocket, and we all need to be in lockstep as to what this is. Because I doubt that if you take this as a number investment and you put it across all of agriculture in Virginia, I wouldn't mind betting that in terms of return back into the economy, there are very few products that we grow in Virginia that compete with this. And when you're up there and you're arguing with the agricultural lobby or the forestry lobby or any one of these other things that's natural product based, that's the people who you're competing with. You're not competing with the shipyard people. And what you're asking for in terms of money when you compare to what goes into agriculture, it's chicken change on the floor. And so I think there are a couple of things that you need to see. Where does the money go to? It goes into rural economies. That's important. And what's the number? And show me something else that gives you a better bang for your buck. And I'm sure all of you have spent time in the past talking to politicians. If you've got those numbers in front of you, you have a much better chance of getting them to listen. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do as part of this debate.
Well, I did some quick Googling there, and I think the number that's a big number anyway was that the Virginia seafood industry is a $1.1 billion a year industry. I mean, I think you can make the argument that oysters are a keystone species that helps support sort of the groundwork of that entire seafood economy and keep the trucks running, the oystermen harvesting, the watermen working when that other part of the seafood economy isn't there. So I mean, anyway, that was from that Virginia ARC seafood agricultural study that I think came out that made headlines a couple of years ago.
Yeah, Virginia Tech's study over at the ARAC in Hampton. And I've got a note here. I'm going to reach out to a couple of the people that did that tomorrow and see if we can't get a number based on stuff that they've done with the seafood industry as a whole, just for oysters in Virginia. Thank you for that, Dr. Mann. Appreciate it.
Roger, please.
And just for discussion purposes, I mean, I can put this up there, the season that I kind of came up with, and just so, you know, I think there were some concerns raised about the market level of this, but that roughly 4.5 month season of when there's a scrape open, if 150 boats are working for that 4.5 months, averaging 16 bushels a boat, I think that puts you at 216,000 bushels, which is 2,000 less than the harvest reported for this year. So it would produce harvest just based on the scrape fishery for that 4.5 months and 150 boats if the market's there.
And the weather's there.
What's that?
the
If-
market and the
right.
weather. If you really need to take that number and back in it from a 2 or 3 year average, because I don't remember too many years that we worked every day.
And that was just 150 boats. It didn't take into account the hand towing on either side and all that, which again isn't huge, but that's just ballpark. Which is, and I guess with these seasons in the past, we've had those 250, 240,000 bushel seasons sort of on park. So I don't think we're shortening things necessarily, but there's not an opportunity for a 300,000, 350,000 bushel season that we had when we had these 4, 5.5 month seasons. And the market conditions were there.
All right, any other comments? I think we have a lot moving forward to look at in the next 2 weeks before we come back and actually come up with an SMAC plan to present to the commission. Any other?
He said he had it on an Excel spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
All right, just to put this up there, I think I captured all the comments there. So this was hand scraping the James, and the change was shifting area 6 from Pat Tong and shortening it 2 weeks there with a comeback. I think there was some back and forth on no season or wait and see there, so I left that alone. This captured the comments on Great Wacomico, having that month, and then having it overlap there in January, and then that 2 months out there, understanding February is probably one of the worst times to be out off Blackberry Hangs. And then on Don's comment, and I think talking to Dan offline, I think he probably echoes the concerns that Don raised about switching back and forth between gear types if you're coming between those areas there. Was there anything that I missed in that, or any thoughts?
The only one was the Rappahannock area 6 with having a contingency on that end of February.
That, so sort of like a, I don't know what color to put that, but I switched that from that, but a little, let's see.
Question mark.
Question mark, yeah. There we go. I'm gonna screw something up if I keep doing this too much. All right, I'll just leave a question mark there, but, and I'd be glad to send this around, but does that kind of capture the discussion that we had today?
Any questions, concerns, any comments on this? Capture everything that everybody says? All right, Andrew, I think that covers it. If you could send that to all of us, I'd appreciate that.
Can do, yeah.
All right, I guess that pretty much covers the preliminary discussion of the 26-27 public oyster harvest. That being said, we'll move on. Do we have any old business, new business, other business?
I'd like to say something, Andrew.
About to take public comments here if you want, but,
Yeah.
right?
Just short and brief.
Come on up, if you want, just to,
No,
just.
no, I'm not into voting, I'm gonna give myself. I sit back here listening to all of this and how y'all trying to do the best you can do. If y'all had left the Rappahannock like it was in the 50s, like my grandfather's day, you wouldn't be facing this trouble. Pat and Tom did. If you had packed Pat and Tom did from one end to the other and left it alone like it was, you wouldn't be looking for shales. And I'm right about that, ain't I, Andrew? Basically, if you had just left it alone and Pat and Tom did it like it was, you wouldn't be facing the problem you're facing today. And I think I'm right about that. Y'all have a good night.
All right, any other public comments?
I got something.
Go ahead, Corey.
I got a question. JC somewhat touched on it, but this daylight savings time, if that goes through in this winter and our start time goes to 8:30, Is that something you all can do, or is that in code as far as changing, if we had to work with something on that? Because I mean, that's 3.5 hours maximum of a time for, you know, for, what is it, probably close to a month, where the time don't really move all about a couple minutes a day.
I think we could probably by emergency adjust end times or something
Right.
like that if we needed to. Is it, I could never figure it out. Is it less light in the morning? Is that what's happening?
Yeah,
then?
it would be like
8:20 to 8:30, something like that for, from about like the 10th of December till about the first part of January. It's definitely after 8 o'clock.
They got it backwards, in my opinion.
I agree.
Yeah.
You know, I think that, I
Not
don't know,
something in
I might
code,
have to
though.
get my work schedule adjusted too for that one, but, I think that's something the commission could likely take emergency action on if something came down and all of a sudden, whatever it was, we needed to take that action. Usually,
Whatever it was, make it.
in October, I think, you know, it goes to, it's at noon, so we could probably shift it back to 2 or whatever it was, or 1, or make up the difference somehow.
One question, Lee.
Sure.
I just thought about it, and I think we talked about it a little bit, Lee, but Andrew, have you seen where there is a bill in Congress to allow commercial harvests on sanctuaries every 3 years? Can you comment on that?
I can comment on it carefully. So I have read the language in the actual bill, so it is, let me get this straight, it's legislative language. As far as I know, it hasn't been adopted by National Marine Fisheries Service, NOAA, or anything like that. It's legislative language in the funding bill for the Department of Commerce. I believe the language stated that oyster harvest, managed oyster harvest could be permitted on sanctuary areas within 3 years. So it didn't say that it had to happen, it said that it could happen. It wasn't a mandate, and I don't want to step on anyone's toes, but I believe that I'm correct in saying that the state of Virginia manages oyster harvest, not the federal government. So I think I'm not sure it changes anything, but it's language that is legislative language that's out there.
All right, any other questions, any other public comments? All right, with that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. We have a motion to adjourn, second?
Oh, second.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Thank
About
you.
13 more minutes? Thank y'all. Thank you, Don.
You're welcome, Andrew. Thank you.
Sorry. Didn't see you back there.
No, you didn't hit me, it was a chair, sorry.